Do you wake up dreaming of living an extraordinary life? I know I do. And living extraordinary means we have to have purpose and meaning behind what we do. And because of this, we tend to live by a code or tenets that help us stay on track and in alignment with our values. This is what we call the narrow way. And it's narrow because it asks us to be consistent and look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what can I do today to move closer to my mission? But what if you're not sure what that extraordinary life looks like? Well, today, my guest is going to share with us one way that we can do just that. And before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, husband, and entrepreneur, then I'm going to encourage you to participate in our group mentorship program called the Band of Brothers. We're a group of ordinary guys working towards living extraordinary lives. And you can find all that information at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. With that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alain Dumonceaux. Before we get started, let me ask you a couple of questions. What does living an extraordinary life look, feel, and sound like to you? And do you have a plan for achieving that? Having a mission is part of the equation to living an extraordinary life, and creating a plan and living by it. That code is the framework that's going to help us get there. The good thing is you don't have to figure all this out on your own. Now, you can do that, but why would you want to? Instead, we're going to rely on my guest today, who's given us an incredible tool to help us achieve our mission. So allow me to introduce my guest. Jeremy Slade is the founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world. He's studied literature at Oxford University, specializes in using podcasting and new media to create celebrity, and what was ranked the number one in iTunes new in 1978 and number 71 in iTunes top 100. Wow, what a great accomplishment. He was named the number one podcast to listen to by Inc. magazine in 2019. And he's also being named a top influencer by Forbes magazine. After his success in podcasting business, Jeremy and his wife, Brielle Slate, founded Command Your Brand to help entrepreneurs like ourselves to get their message out there by appearing as guests on podcasts. So welcome to the show today, Jeremy. How are things, brother?
Hey, I'm stoked to be here, Alan, and then I'm doing great, man. How about yourself?
Yeah, doing really good. Just really excited about just being able to be in the podcast sphere. There's just so much things that we can learn and do. And I really enjoy spending time with guests such as yourselves, because I find that, as much as this content's for my audience, I get so much out of it as well. And I'm sure you have a similar feeling with your show.
I'm in the same boat, man. Like I started my podcast back in 2014, literally because I wanted the ability to get to learn from the people that I currently get to learn from. And luckily I get to then share that learning with other people. So frankly, I'm humbled every day I get to do what I get to do,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an honor to be able to do this, right? And the difference is that you've actually taken action and steps towards. And so, working here at the Awakened Man, one of the things that we talk a lot about, Jeremy, is about all of us being on our own little hero's quest. We'll always have our journey in life. So specifically, I'd like you to tell us about a time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do about it? How did that experience shape you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
I feel like there's been several, but if I had to look at just one, back in 2012, I was teaching in a high school. I wasn't very happy doing it. And my mom ended up having a really bad stroke, and it made me look at a lot of the different things I was doing in my life. And I'm like, I don't know if it made me look at mortality or what it made me look at, but it just made me look at, I guess, life and what you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
So frankly, that really set me on a quest to kind of figure out what that was going to look like. I guess it wasn't the moment where everything changed, but it was the moment where I started looking. And I think for a lot of us, we never have the awareness to look, right? We never have the awareness to see what's around us. So for me, I started looking where I was. Did I want to be there? Where did I want to be? And what I really found out, interestingly enough, and I think a lot of us have been in this place, I never really explored what I wanted to do with my life or the impact that I wanted to have with my life. And I tried a bunch of different things. Then after leaving that teaching career, I tried network marketing. I tried life insurance sales. I tried online marketing. I tried just about everything you could try. And I'd been a podcast fan since about 2009. So I just something I'd always loved. So I ended up starting a podcast just as a hobby, and it ended up having 10,000 listens in its first month. And I'm like, wow, I guess we have something here. So for me, it wasn't that there's been many moments where I've kind of like had these shifts and changes in my life. But if I had to look at it, that was the single one that made me look at everything very differently.
Wow, that's incredible. And you know what? It's so interesting about, the people that I interview and have on the show is that we always seem to have this catalyst. That's why I like to talk about that hero's journey right out of the gate to give folks an understanding that isn't it interesting how something happens in our life and it forces us to look at the perspectives that we have, the maybe some of the values we're carrying at the time, maybe some limiting beliefs we might have about things. And it gives us that chance to really shake up our lives and make a new path forward. And that talking about earlier about that narrow way. And so when we have that, like you did with your mom, it gives us an opportunity now to do something different. And I think that's just so outstanding.
Because I think for so many of us, we look at what society wants for us, we look at what our families want for us, we look at what our friends want for us, and we just do that, right? Because we either don't want criticism, or we feel a failure, a fear of failure, or whatever it may be. So instead, we do what's safe, and we do what we think we should do. There's a quote by Mark Twain where he says, "Many men die at 27 and they're not buried till 78," because a lot of people's dreams die in their 20s, and then by the time they just kind of go through the motions and exist until one day they don't anymore. And I think it's a sad way to look at life, but I think for many of us, if we don't explore our dreams and explore our own purpose, you're going to be very unhappy for what's supposed to be the greatest years of your life.
Absolutely. And so true with that quote. I love that quote from Twain as well. That I was just actually listening to a podcast just earlier before getting on today, and it was the art of manliness, and he was interviewing a guy that wrote a book about Emerson, really the first American Stoic. And I'm a huge fan of Emerson. It just reminded me of all the ideas that Emerson was very much the same way as Twain, right? About that inner guidance, to trust that. Yet we look as we're raised to believe that what the external piece, that external locus of control, is more important than looking at ourselves individually. And I think, when we start to lean into that and we trust a little bit more, life does shift and change. So I'm sure you're having that similar experience.
That's my second daughter's name, by the way, Emerson. And it does come from Emerson. My mom, I'm really into family trees, and on my mom's side of the family, her maiden name was Emerson. So we're not closely related, but we're distantly related to Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to, give that name to my daughter. So that's our second daughter's name is Emerson.
Wow, there's just no accidents. Well, you know what? Let's lead into fatherhood. I wanted to ask you about that. How has fatherhood shaped your perspective about the work that you're doing and how you're living today?
It's changed it big time because, frankly, I don't know an easy way to put this, but I was an only child, and I was also like an adult at a very young age, if that makes sense. That's not because it was expected of me, whatever. I just didn't really fit in. So for me, I just grew up quick. So I wasn't great with kids, if that makes sense. So I had to learn a lot about myself in becoming a dad. I had to learn a lot about that. And frankly, it's shifted my perspective big time. It's made me look, I think we complain so much about like the current culture war and things like that, like we're experiencing right now. And so much of that starts at home and what we're creating in our homes. And that was one of the big realizations for me becoming a dad, because now I want to help my kids become, better adults and protect them from what they could be experiencing out there. So for me, I feel like it made me much more of a protector and much more aware of the things out there that could endanger my kids, and I think a lot of ways I've become more of that protective dad,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're raising three daughters, right? And so
two
daughters.
If you count my dogs, I got four, but two daughters.
Oh, there we go. But still raising young daughters and young women, right, in today's society, it's so challenging, really for anything, and any of us as parents. And my children are in their late 20s and early 30s, but I'm, as much as the struggles they had growing up, I don't envy the work that you're having to do today in what society is putting forward for us. And so
it's a difficult world to be in. It's a difficult world to be in. And that's frankly for us, like, she's 4. So next year we'll kind of be delving into this, but that's one of the reasons we want to homeschool is, I'm a little bit terrified of the education system because frankly, I barely survived it myself. I was like one of these like really smart kids and they're like, oh my gosh, he's too active. He's too smart. He won't follow all these orders. So let's put him on drugs.
Yeah.
And that was the reason my parents put me in private school, not that they could afford it. So for me, I don't want that same experience for my kids. I want them to be challenged. I want them to work hard. I want their strengths to be built and made stronger. And for us, we're going to figure out how to do that a lot more in a homeschooling type format.
Absolutely. And I think that's great. That's a great thing to do. I know lots of folks that are doing that more and more. And I think that's been a result of what we finally recognize. If there was anything positive that came out of the pandemic here over the last few years, is that we recognize just how broken our education system is, just how challenging it is for our kids. And when we recognize that, lots of parents are stepping up and now saying, you know what, I'm going to take more responsibility for how my kids are raised and what goes into their brains.
And it's as sad as I can say. I think here in the U.S., it's on purpose. It is actually on purpose. There was a gentleman out of Brazil in the 1980s. His name was Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire was a gentleman that took Marxist thought and mixed it with like the type of theology that was going around at the time. And basically he removed liberation theology. There, my brain started working again. He took liberation theology and the ideas behind it and removed the religious aspects and brought actually the kind of the struggle of Marxism into it. And in the 80s, this actually got into our College of Education here in America, so that a lot of our teachers are being given this viewpoint of, more of this Marxist teaching viewpoint rather than like, hey, let's educate our kids. Let's make them capable. Let's make them able to start businesses and run things. And I think, as you said, it's especially during the pandemic, because a lot of kids were home and had Zoom call school, we were able to kind of see what was happening out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good. And I'm starting to see a shift and I'm seeing that change, and
Yes.
And so that's a positive thing, even though it's slow and it's a bit painful, but at least we're starting to make a change. And I hold true that ultimately things will get better and we'll be in a better place. And so, listen, we're starting to talk a little bit about adversity, and I wanted to get into that. And so some of my past guests have really had some amazing stories about overcoming it, but tell me what common thread that you've learned about adversity and anything in your life and those of the podcast guests that you've had on your show.
So I think number one, the main thing to understand about adversity is there's going to be 2 different types of people in the way they approach it. The first is going to be the person that looks at that and says, that's scary. I'm going to drink beer and watch football and kind of do whatever it may be do instead of that. The other person is going to look at that and say, okay, let's take a step back for a second. Let's gather ourselves and we're going to figure out how we can get better from this experience. And so I think adversity is an incredible thing because you can look at it in the days of the blacksmiths, right? If they wanted to create a sword or something incredible out of metal, they had to heat that metal and hammer it and make it into something incredible. And that's exactly what adversity does for us. It takes our tragedy, it takes our sometimes triumph that comes out of it, and it helps us become the person we need to become. It's a very transformative process. And I've seen it with so many of my guests as well as myself, right? Like I'm not the same person I was until my life kind of shifted drastically and I had to learn what I wanted to do with my life and learn how to build a business. And after losing my first business, learn how to build my second and kind of the ashes of that. So I think we build skills, we build staying power, but I think the most important thing, Alan, is we build our head. We build our ability to think and be tough and kind of build that grit. I think if I had to look at the main thing that's missing, I'm in my mid-30s, so if I had to look at the main thing missing in my generation, it's this idea of grit, right? This idea of grit. The ability to work through something and become harder. I think a lot of people hear grit and they think of True Grit, the John Wayne movie. And it's like, no, it is not just a cowboy movie. Like grit is that thing. It's that tough character. It's that, you're willing to kind of grind through something and be a little edgy,
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to, Emerson. I was just thinking that self-reliance, right? Having that,
yes,
that congruence what our thoughts, words, and actions we believe in manifest and actually do represent what it is, and we're in that strong alignment. And I think, I don't know what you feel, but I always think about when we're dealing with adversity, it reveals character more than it builds. I think it's the revelation first, and then and I think back to my experience. I had married my high school sweetheart, and then just as I was into my 30s, everything fell apart, and we ended up by getting separated and all that. But I had an experience that got me in trouble with the law, and I always thought that prior to that wouldn't be the kind of guy that I am. And then in the moment of crux of the most intense emotional pain that you can be put into, I don't think we really know unless we've done the work, truly done the work internally to understand that we can, how we will react. And I think I always think back to those moments in our life about how adversity gets dealt with. And I loved how you talked about how we can either choose to numb out or we can choose to take action and do and take it forward to actually do better in the world.
And I think it's interesting because I know it's a bit funny to say it, but you think of some of like the apocalyptic type, series that are out there of like, when the world ends or when the zombies come out of nowhere, right? Like it kind of reveals who people really are, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's are they a weak person that figures out how they can just kind of use people through manipulation or whatever it may be, or are they somebody that looks for protecting others? Like I don't know if you watched any of the series, but I just wrapped up 1883, which is kind of the precursor to the series Yellowstone. And Tim McGraw's character is kind of the main character in this, and he's a self-reliant character, but he has this, he cares for others, and I think that's what's really important because in all of our lives we have this balance between self-determinism and pan-determinism. Self-determinism means we can be determined for ourselves, but pan-determinism means we can also be determined across a group or multiple groups. And I think so many times we have to look at like, how many groups in my life is this good for? And that's kind of what an optimum solution looks like,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that understanding of what true leadership means, right? And great reference to 1883. I love that series, and hopefully they can get their stuff together and we can finish up the original Yellowstone. But anyways, the idea of that, when I think back to his character and what he had to do and what he stood for, and I can see remnants of my grandfather and my father. I don't know if you have the similar idea or we had from your other guests, but I think there are moments of that in our lives, but we've just had it too good. We've had it so well. What's adversity today? Like you keep saying to my wife, we have first world problems, and some of the things that we're challenged with, and we don't really know what it means to have to really learn, and like you said, grit and get that sandpaper back in our life and to be able to do the hard thing. And I think it's important that as in this work that I'm doing with men's work and the work that you're doing and helping elevate people, that we understand we have to be willing to lean into, be afraid, challenge ourselves, challenge a norm, a belief that maybe doesn't serve us any longer. And if we're willing to do that introspection, man, the things that are open for us are just like, it's imaginable.
Well, I think the last several years have actually, you talk about adversity. I think it's one of the toughest times that we've lived through, maybe since I'd say the Second World War, if you want to look at it that way. And I think we've learned about like who we can trust, who we can't trust. We've also learned about like who our friends really are, right? We've had people change their decisions based on what medical treatment they chose to take or not take. So we've had adversity, I think, and it's actually frankly revealed a lot to us about like who we are as people. And I think the thing that we've kind of seen is you really have to be stronger to your beliefs. And if you observe something you don't agree with, say something about that. And I think a lot of people haven't been willing to do that. They just want to kind of be quiet or whatever it may be.
Yeah, because you know what? It's easier to fall in line than it is to stand up. And I think
correct.
And I think there's a way to we can still stand up and be true to ourselves and still maintain that integrity. And I think we've as men especially, we've lost a lot of that piece of integrity, that it's easier for us to fall in line and sleepwalk through life than it is to stand up and say what we want, especially when it comes to our relationships.
Yeah.
And because we struggle, because we haven't really learned how to be in relationships. And so we end up by being nice guys and allow ourselves to be emasculated, and we don't step into understand that it's okay to have a differing opinion. It's okay to have a conversation. But we seem to be in a society today that the moment that you're not on the right, saying the right thing, then you're either going to get canceled or you're going to get shunned. And I think there's opportunity for us to be able to continue to turn that around, that have open dialogue.
Yes.
And figure things out so that we can move forward that makes sense for everyone and not for a select few.
I think for men especially, though, it's been really difficult too, because there's kind of been this like identity crisis for men, if you know what I mean. Like that there's been like this idea of like saying toxic masculinity, and the other side, but then there's the other side of it. The guys are like, I'm a man, I control women and blah, blah, blah. And it's the balance is actually somewhere in between, right? And realizing like there's a nurturing side to being a man, and there's also the side of protecting your family. And I think whatever gets more views on social media right now has kind of been popular. And I think it's been really to the detriment of what is a father and provider and husband, and what does it mean to really be a man?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about changing our identity and really
Yes.
understanding how it's been shaped, and being able to then recognize where we need to step up, and how can we and how we can do that. And I think that's so key. And that's kind of leads me into, I want to talk a little bit about your book, Unremarkable to Extraordinary: Ignite Your Passion to Go from Passive Observer to Creator of Your Own Life. And now in your book, you offer us 12 tenets to live by. Can you touch on a couple of those that has made the most impact, or made a powerful impact, at least in your life?
Well, the first we already really touched on, and that's the idea of adversity and how important that is. But I think another thing, and we talked about this in brief when we were talking about like our kids, but I think education is huge. And the thing that I've seen in a lot of the people I've talked to, and even to myself, like I have a master's degree I don't use. I think we've put so much of an emphasis on higher education and schooled education. And I will tell you from all the conversations I've had, and even from my own life experience, you have to be your own advocate for education. Always be interested in learning, always be interested in finding what's out there. And I'm a big believer in learning by doing. Find a trade, or find work under somebody for a period of time, or whatever it may be. But you have to be willing to go out and get the information, not just depend on a school in the traditional sense to give it to you. That's the biggest thing I've seen. Another giant thing I would say is leadership and how we lead. And we have to understand that everybody's really looking for a leader that's going to, not ask things of them they wouldn't do themselves. And I think we've kind of gotten this culture of, look at this name tag. It says I'm the boss. You need to do what I say. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a hierarchy and there's not a chain of command and things like that, but you should never ask people to do something you're not willing to do yourself. It's one of the major things I've seen in leadership failures from the conversations I've had. It's something as old as the art of war, but for some reason we continue again and again and again to fail to apply it, because people will respect you when they see that you're not too good to do something, if that makes sense. Real leaders are people that are going to work just as hard as you will, but they're going to give you the right direction. They're going to give you the right strategy. So to me, leadership and how we actually lead is vital. Another really big thing is around vision and how we look at things. As to be a successful entrepreneur, because really that was the viewpoint I wrote the book through. You have to be able to remember the past, but not live in it. Be able to see 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, and 6 years from now, because you have to realize there's so many permutations that come off every decision you make. You have to be willing to make the ones that are right for the future of where you want to take things, and also not just where things are now. Because I think so often we make short-sighted decisions, or we have a failure and then we live in that failure. So how we really handle our decision-making is vital.
Oh man, that's so powerful. I totally agree with that. And I just wanted to take a little bit step and go back. I
Sure.
liked your point about leadership, and about how really what you're talking about is being a servant leader, and being able to come from that perspective where, if one of the mottos I used to say a lot, I don't much anymore. I guess I have to wonder why I don't. But anyways, is, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That means being able to spend some time and understand and getting to know the people that you work with. But even more importantly is that, are you willing to step in and do the mucky muck, the dirty stuff that you're asking them to do? And I grew up earlier in my career in hospitality. So that's managing hotels and restaurants and kitchens and stuff. And so, I'd be the first guy when it was really busy to jump in and be the guy in the dish pit, washing dishes, scrubbing pots or whatever, because I can't expect the others. And when they could see that the general manager is willing to go in and do what needs to get done, then it's pretty easy for people to come and buy in. And so I really appreciated your perspective on that. And then
Well, it inspires confidence too, though, right? Because here's the thing, like, let's look at it in a business perspective. If somebody leaves your organization and you know how to handle an area, and you can go in and handle that area and, make it stable again before you hire somebody, number one, your business isn't going to be of, an adverse effect of that. But number two, it also inspires faith in your organization, because they know it's bigger than any just one sudden change in the organization. They know you can handle it. So I think at the same time, it inspires confidence across your organization if you're willing to lead like that.
Absolutely, because they're willing, because then they see that it's okay to be in, to be in in different area. No, some organizations are very much built like silos, and everyone stays within their lane. And when I hear that kind of the chatter going on, it really concerns me on the growth of that organization. Short term, it may be fine, but long term, the opportunity for that organization to disintegrate is going to be pretty strong, because there's
Oh yeah.
not an opportunity to go around and learn and do different things. Doesn't mean you need to be excellent at all, but you have to be willing enough to have enough knowledge to be able to support those different areas. And I think that's prerequisite as leaders and as men, as we step into these roles, that we need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because we probably don't know what we're doing when we step into these other roles, and that's fine.
I would challenge you a little bit on that though.
Sure.
I would say we all need to be excellent. And I would say from the perspective of, there's a really awesome quote, and I looked this up so I didn't butcher it. There's an awesome quote from Vince Lombardi. I'm a huge Green Bay Packers fan. Excellence must be pursued, and it must be wooed with all of one's might and every bit of effort that we have each day. There's a new encounter, and the new week is a new challenge. And there's another thing that he says on it as well, is that perfection is unattainable. We're going to chase perfection, because within that, we're going to chase excellence. So I think we have to always hold ourselves to the standard that we're, everything we do is going to be perfect. Obviously it's not possible to be perfect, but you know what? We're going to become pretty excellent if we try as hard as we can to be perfect.
Outstanding. Absolutely. And I would agree with that. I would agree with that, especially when it comes to our calling in life and our peace in life. I think we want to make sure that we're striving for excellence in all those aspects. And as we grow other parts of ourselves, when we're not as excellent in it, at least we have built those habits and that skill set to be able to push through when we have that tough time where we're not really competent yet in what we're doing. And so, yeah, totally love what Lombardi has to say. We've already started to touch on a little bit about masculinity and some of the challenges that we're faced with today and what men are faced with. But what is your take on why it is that we're struggling so much today, and what do we need to do about it?
Well, there's a couple perspectives on this. If you take down men, you take down the pillar of a society, and it's much easier to push people to tyranny. I would say that that's one part of it. So there's always going to be that struggle, and there's been that struggle through history. But I think the other perspective of it is, when we look at it, if you're taking away self-reliance, then people become kind of more reliant on government. And I think, not to say government's a bad thing. It's an agreement between people. This is a thing we need to have so that we all have some sense of security. But I think at the same time, what has happened is people are much easier to control if there are no strong men. Strong men take responsibility. They look at bad times and see what they can do for it. There's a term that says, and I'm going to butcher this one again, but I looked the other one up, which was good. But it's that, hard times make strong men, and weak times make, and easy times make weak men. And I think when you look at it, it's in some ways it's a gift to have the difficulty that men have, because you're forced to be better. You're forced to be more excellent. You're forced to take more responsibility. You're forced to take better care of your family. And I think when we get back to that, we have to really look at, what are the core tenets of what we believe in our home, because everything comes out of your home. Religion comes from your home because it comes there first. The first ability to read and things like that for your kids comes from the home. Morals and values, mores, taboos, those things all come from the home. So I think when it comes back to it, having a strong male figure in the household is vital, because a lot of those things are going to further what goes out in society.
Absolutely. And those are the things that comes specifically from men. And then while it's important that we have moms in the home, we need to have both. We need to have both that mother and father figure in there, because both come with different perspectives and come from a different point, a different energy, I'll say. And so we need that driving force of the masculine to help move the family forward and keep them, as we were talking about earlier, about protecting them and presiding over the family, the structure, in order for growth to occur. Because the statistics are all over the place when you look at the fatherless home issues, and we're almost as bad as it is in the US. I think it's something like, I read 35% of homes in the US are fatherless. And I just think about the challenges that's facing us today. And that's really the reason why I think our young men are in such trouble, and why they are in a position where they're at. And that's not saying there's anything that the single moms are doing this. The challenge is how, as a society, we've accepted that that's okay. And there are other political reasons why some of that's happening as well, that we may not have time to dive into today, but it's an issue and we need to fix it.
Even from a physical health perspective, though, because it's important that you take care of yourself to be there for your family, right? Like they want you there in later years of your life and middle years of your life. And the other perspective as well is, things aren't great all the time, right? And sometimes it is important to have a strong military in some ways. And there was a survey that was done, and I don't have the name of the group that did it here, but it was 80% of Americans age 17 to 24 are actually unfit for military service because of health and weight problems. Like, we're just not taking care of ourselves. And if we can't show up well in our own lives, we can't show up well for the people around us. So like, it's also something to really consider.
Absolutely, for sure. It's the whole man perspective, every aspect of our lives. And we just can't, we're doing ourselves a disservice when we choose to not take care of our bodies, or we're going to focus on just our careers or one aspect. And I think that's why it's important we look at all parts of who we are as men and spend time working and growing in each aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%.
You're very powerful as an influencer today, but being an influencer is really a double-edged sword, I would say. So just look at how cancel culture has become, that's this reaction to what ends up by happening. So what is our responsibility as influencers? Does it start and end with the message that we're bringing out to the world?
So that's really, really important. And it's because I have a lot of friends that they'll give out good information and it's really powerful, but they do something really wrong at the end of it. You can talk to people about something scary and you can talk about people about something important, but you always have to leave people realizing that something can be done about it. Because what happens is you're making people effective everything that's happening to them. In every single relationship in your life, influencer or not, but in every single relationship or area of your life, everyone should be leaving you feeling more causative. If they are not, you need to check yourself and take a look at what you're doing, because you're inspiring fear and not inspiring courage and cause. So to me, that is the major thing we need to take a look at is what I'm doing, is it helping people and making them more causative? It might be some scary information they have to have, but am I leaving them in some way that they now can feel like they can do something about the information I'm giving them? Because so many times it's about, something in your house can kill you, news at 10, and then we don't tell you what you can do about it. Like it's you have to understand, like, this is a bad situation. What are you going to do about it? And if you're not leaving people like that, like you're better off not creating content, I guess, in a way.
Man, I was not expecting that as a response. And the reason I'm really I'm blown away. I'm really big on cause effect.
Yeah. And I talk about it in everything, man, because it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Right. And so this whole life that we live is all about cause and effect. When we start to take responsibility for our actions, our life is exactly where it is today because of what we've thought and what we've said and what we've done. And when we can realize that how we cause the ultimate effect in our lives and other people's, then we can start to make change. I wasn't expecting that. I thought, that's phenomenal.
Cause and effect is everywhere, though, right? Because so many times we talked about adversity, right? And people want to complain about what happens to them because they want to be effective life rather than being causative to life, because you can be caused by what you did or didn't do, right? Like if you neglect to do something, you're still cause, right?
That's right.
So to me, I think that's one of the biggest things you should be looking at, in your relationships, in your media coverage, all these different things. You can always be causative, right? But a lot of people are choosing to be effect, right? It's the same thing where when somebody says, I'm going to build a great business and, one day the media is going to cover me. It's like, I hate to tell you this, but unless you commit a crime or do something really bad, they're not going to talk about you. You have to be your own advocate. You have to be causative in just in every area of your life.
Man, what a great subtle point as well to make, that being cause is also the things that we choose not to do.
Yeah.
Because just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And what a great subtle piece. I just love that. I really like that you were able to pinpoint that, because we think as guys that everything's about do. And really it's also about being, okay, is this the best thing for me to do today? And or in this moment or in this instance? And maybe it's not. So thank you so much for bringing that to light.
But it's also considering, like, what effect am I going to create by doing this, right? Like, sometimes you can look at a situation, you can be like, well, I need to say blah in the situation. You look at it, you're like, okay, but what effect would that create? And I think so many times you can look at a situation and realize you're going to make this situation worse by what you do. And sometimes it's just not necessary to do something, right? Because you have to look at what is the effect I'm going to create by my communication or what I'm doing here.
Absolutely. Outstanding. I'm sure you've gotten this far in life and as successful as you are because you read a few books. So I'm curious.
Just a couple.
What's sitting on your nightstand right now?
Sitting on my nightstand right now. So I'm doing audiobooks right now, and I'm reading a couple different ones at the same time because I've just how my brain works. So what am I reading right now? Here, let's grab my Audible app. Right now, I'm reading The Fourth Turning, which is a really interesting book about 20-year cycles in history, about history itself being 80-year cycles. So that's kind of the one I'm like really into right now. I just finished a book called Washington about George Washington by Ron Chernow, which was really interesting. So I'm reading a lot of like historical things and a lot of like historical theory and stuff like that, because I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I think that just comes from me being like a history mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, if we don't study history, we're doomed to repeat it, aren't we? So
100%.
So it's outstanding. Love that. All throughout your career, you must have come across, especially with your podcast, of some pretty interesting and incredible advice. But if you were to think back, then what is one piece of advice that has really given you service, and has it been able to move you forward?
Best way to handle work is to do it now. I think, far too often we're putting everything off. We're planning. And sometimes you got to execute, make it ugly, and just keep moving forward. And you're going to have more results than the guy next to you if you just do it now.
Yeah, I love that. Outstanding. Jeremy, of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there wasn't something I didn't get a chance to ask you about, but if you were to have one takeaway for our listeners today, what would that be?
I would just go back to what we've talked about adversity here, right? Because adversity is going to highlight who you really are, help you become better than you currently are. And there's a lot to be found in it if you embrace it. So I would just say, really highlighting, what we've talked about relating around adversity today.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. I just want to say once again, thanks a lot, Jeremy, for being on the show and spending some time with us. And I think we've been able to lay a few breadcrumbs down the path to helping folks understand how they can go from being unremarkable to doing extraordinary things. And when we manage our message, we understand how the cause and effect aspect of our message is in play, then I think we can do like some great things. So if folks were really interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your programs and getting involved with your work, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, I would say that right now by connecting with the book is the best way for them to do that. So they can get that over at getextraordinarybook.com. They can grab their copy, and that's kind of the entrance into my world. So that's getextraordinarybook.com.
Outstanding. I'm going to make sure that and your social feed are in the show notes for today's episode. I want to say once again, thanks a lot for being on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Alan, thanks so much for having me, man. I had a great time.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.